From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. Our guest for this broadcast is Tom Bethell, a distinguished author, a graduate of Oxford University, and a man who has an outstanding new book out, which I would encourage you to read. It's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Science. Now, that's an attractive cover, and it's got a picture of a friendly-looking animal on the cover. What is that sheep doing on the cover of your book?
That's Dolly. That's the sheep that was cloned.
Really?
Yeah.
So you have an article here about cloning?
I have a chapter on cloning, and I realized they told me really when the book was almost written that was going to be on the cover, and I said, well, I don't have anything on cloning in the book, and they said, well, could you do just like a box or something? So I eventually did a chapter, and I did it in about 5 days.
And what was your conclusion or your observation?
Well, the whole subject of fraud has come up in connection with cloning, in connection with the stem cell research that has been done in South Korea. And there were questions. There's a whole history of fraud, actually, behind cloning. I don't think there was fraud in the case of Dolly, which was done in Scotland in 1997, I believe. But the one thing that has become clear from the whole cloning controversy is that it turned out to be much more difficult to do than people thought at the time. They thought they could take the best farm animals and reproduce them through cloning so that they would get lots more milk or whatever it was that they wanted from the animal. But in fact, they had to repeat the experiment over and over again, and the whole thing turned out to be very hit or miss. They just did it. The same South Korean guy who's now in trouble, Dr. Huang, was the first one to clone a dog, supposedly. This was last summer, and they had to just repeat the experiment, trial and error, thousands of times before they finally got one. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very inefficient process, and it's not going to have any commercial value, which means that it's probably not really going to be pursued, I would say.
So we're not in danger of cloned humans?
They haven't been able to do it yet, and I would think it's unlikely, yeah.
This is a little bit off the mark, but recently there was much press attention devoted to a face transplant.
Yes.
What does that bode for our future?
I think that kind of cosmetic surgery or activity is likely to increase. But again, all of these things, are very expensive, so its cost is going to enter into as a consideration.
Do you think we'll ever see such a thing as a brain transplant?
No.
Tell me why.
Well, the thing is, with all of these things, Howie, it turns out to be much more difficult to do this kind of activity than people had originally realized. Take the case of stem cell research. There was all kinds of criticism of President Bush, because the research, he actually made it legal to do the stem cell research and to make the federal money available, but there were restrictions put on it. So he was blamed for putting the restrictions on, not praised for allowing the work to go forward at all. This is sort of typical of what's been going on. So they then started to do this research, and they found, I think, that it was actually that the problem involved in coaxing, as they put it, these embryonic stem cells to become the cells that are needed, that are missing in the case of diabetics, for example, was much harder than they had originally realized. So private biotech money did go into it, and they tried to do it, and then they found it was difficult. So then they said, okay, let's see if we can get the taxpayers to pay for it. So they got California on the hook for $3 billion, the taxpayers. All of these wealthy Hollywood people promoted the idea, and they got them on the hook for $3 billion. And at that point they said, by the way, don't expect any results or any treatments anytime soon. It may take decades. So all of these things, and you mentioned brain transplant, they're much, much harder to do than had originally been estimated.
Things have occurred in the last 100 years that were beyond the imagination of most people in the previous years. Heart transplants. Wherein reposes the human soul? Is there such thing as a soul transplant or transfer with any of these operations, where portions of another individual's physique, body, are implanted in the physique of another?
Where you would say that you now have you don't have the same person anymore? Is that what
I'm asking?
Yeah.
Why is there? What would it take for there to be a soul transplant?
I mean, I suppose if you could imagine there being such a thing as a brain transplant, you might say, well, I just do not recognize this as being the same person anymore.
Yeah, they say that with the face transplant, there was a concern about a dual personality, about the degree to which the woman who was the beneficiary of the transplant might in some way assume the character of
yes, I don't think that's a reasonable fear or concern at all.
Well, let's move on to some of the other things in your book. These are all interesting speculations, but you bust some myths, it says. And one of the myths was that most Christians at one point thought the earth was flat. There's a bestseller on the New York Times list by Thomas Friedman called...
oh, yeah. He's referring to that
Flat Earth. But
there is a book called another book called the Flat Earth Myth, which I discuss in the book, where there was a professor, as a matter of fact, at the University of California, surprisingly enough. His name was Burton Russell, I believe, who investigated this whole question, and he found that it was completely untrue that the Christians in the earlier period believed that the earth was flat. I think he was able to find 5 people who may have believed it, but all of the well-known theologians and philosophers all knew perfectly well that the earth was a sphere.
They did.
So that's one of the myths.
And there are other myths you challenge, and one of them is the general supposition that religion is the enemy of science. How do you refute that?
Well, to some extent, these days, some scientists are hostile to religion. I mean, there is a modern version of this, but in the earlier period, religion and science were not perceived as being enemies at all. So Isaac Newton, who was perhaps the greatest scientist in history, was, I wouldn't say necessarily a religious man, but he's very much interested in religion. He wrote a lot about the Bible. He was what you might call a Unitarian, I think. And there's this whole business about Galileo, which is always brought up as being the one and only sort of example.
Why don't you explain the history of Galileo and his relation with the church? Well,
Galileo, promoted the Copernican theory, and he had, perfected or embellished the telescope. And the Catholic Church at the time, the Pope at the time, they were a little bit, they wanted him to represent this, the Copernican theory that the Earth goes around the sun, as being a theory, not as just a sort of a fact. They wanted him to tone it down. So anyway, he wrote this book, and in the course of writing it, he made some disparaging. He represented the characters, some of the people in the form of a dialogue, and one of them was he kind of ridiculed the Pope. He made the Pope look silly. And this annoyed the Pope, because you didn't really do that.
More than his theory.
More than his theory. And so he was put under house arrest. And he was told that he had to say the Psalms daily, and he got his sister to say the Psalms for him. So he had a pretty rough time, I mean, this is the great example of the warfare of religion and science that they're able to come up with. And the fact of the matter is that Christianity, more than any other religion, encouraged the use of the faculty of reason. I mean, it encouraged that, and science really flourished at the time when Christianity was strong. It is now, when Christianity in a way is weakening, that you see science also becoming highly politicized and the real protocols of science being undermined by saying that consensus should replace scientific method and so on.
We're going to have to take a break at this point. When we come back, there is much more for us to discuss in your book. The whole question of Darwinian evolution, intelligent design, nuclear power, AIDS, and much, much more. This is not your only book. Tom, you've produced some terrific books on the importance of property and other issues, and your column in the American Spectator as senior editor is superb. To continue our discussion, please stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages. One of the major activities of the Conservative Caucus is Constitution education. We want to help raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the underlying principles of the Constitution and the meaning of its key provisions. Through programs such as Conservative Roundtable, through mailings, workshops, conferences, seminars, we strive to communicate the legacy of the Founding Fathers. Each year, we commemorate Constitution Day, September 17th. We publish newsletters, action bulletins, and other materials to promote an understanding of and fidelity to the Constitution, and we work with members of Congress who share our vision and share our concern. We hope you will decide to work with us as well by becoming a supporter of the Conservative Caucus.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Face the Truth is a production of the Conservative Caucus and is seen twice monthly on the station you are watching. We will be interviewing the movers and shakers of the pro-life movement. We hope to educate and even inspire you about what is being done in our country to protect and to promote the sanctity of life. Please watch us.
Don't miss Face the Truth with Stephen Peruka and Conservative Roundtable with Howard Phillips right here on this station every week.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Help the Arbor Day Foundation plant more trees across the nation. Plant a tree today for all the world to share.
Go to arborday.org.
Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, King of the Apes, father of boy. He knows what it takes to be a dad. You go for a ride. You take a swim. You hang out. All it takes is time. Hey, it doesn't take a hero, but it takes a man to be a dad.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, and our guest on this edition of Conservative Roundtable is Tom Bethell, who is the senior editor for the American Spectator. He's written for many publications, and he's authored some marvelous books. His most recent book is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Science. Tom, what motivated you to write this book?
Regnery has been...
Regnery is a publishing company.
Regnery Publishing has been doing a series of books, started a series of books just last year called The Politically Incorrect Guide to, and they had done one on, I think, American history, then they did one on Islam, and they then decided, I think they thought about doing one on intelligent design anyway, then it got changed to science, and more generally, and I had been writing about some of these issues for the American Spectator, so they asked me if I'd write the book on the subject, and I was...
Good choice. What is the name of the fellow who has done the Politically Incorrect Guide to History? I've got his book. It's a terrific book. Tom Woods. Tom Woods. As a matter of fact, he's spoken up at Christendom College.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. Yeah, right.
Well, this is great that Regnery is doing it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, they're doing. Then I think they're doing some more. I mean, they've done fairly well in terms of sales. You know, they're kind of designed to look a little bit like the Dummy's Guide 2. They're reader friendly, as they say.
Right.
Kind of try to make them a little bit amusing if you can.
Now, talk about AIDS in Africa. That's one of the issues in the book.
That's an amazing subject. You know, global warming is the subject that has come up perhaps most often because it's in the news. But the AIDS in Africa, but I think people are kind of suspicious about global warming because they sort of sense that there's a political agenda and America is the enemy.
And it gets cold.
Yeah. But AIDS in Africa, this does not get any attention. And basically, here's how this one goes. AIDS is regular AIDS in America. It's like 28 different diseases, and if you have an HIV test and you're positive on the test, then you have AIDS. In Africa, they don't have to do the HIV test. Think about that. In other words, if you've got various other conditions, if you've got a fever, if you've got weight loss, diarrhea, a few other things, they give you a point system. It's all in the book, the points. If you get 12 points, adds up to 12 points, then you can be diagnosed as having AIDS. No HIV test is needed. That meant immediately there were millions of people in Africa who by definition had AIDS.
Which means more foreign aid.
Which all turned into $15 billion. I must say, Bush, I kind of admire him in many ways, but he fell for that one. And he turned over $15 billion. And
Bono even seduced Jesse Helms on this.
Yeah, and the Treasury Secretary, I mean, they all... Paul O'Neill, they all fell for it. And, you know, they claimed that because of all of this AIDS in Africa, the population of sub-Saharan Africa was going to be in a state of crisis, was going to decline, people... and what happened? This redefinition of AIDS took place in 1985, 20 years ago. Since then, the population of sub-Saharan Africa has increased by 300 million people. The population,
even with the massacres,
even with the pandemic and all of that stuff. So the whole thing.
Well, that should make your book a bestseller right there. That's one of the great untold stories.
Yeah, and now they do. I should hasten to add that they do. Since then, they do HIV tests in prenatal clinics and so on. But the problem with the HIV test is that it reacts positive to lots of other conditions, including a lot of these conditions that are endemic in Africa. So, and one of the conditions that you get a positive reading on is pregnancy itself. So how much actual HIV in Africa is a totally unknown. I mean, they do not know.
Is sodomy a growing problem in Africa?
No, I don't think so. I don't think. I mean,
because that is believed to be one of the causes of AIDS.
I think that's a complete slander. And you know, HIV can only be transmitted heterosexually with just thousands of sexual contacts they found in the West. So, as it is, the whole thing is a slander against African morals. And I'm surprised that some of those African leaders haven't protested about this. But of course, they, to some extent, get to be the beneficiaries of this foreign aid.
They get the money.
They get the money. They get to distribute the money.
Isn't that interesting?
That's why Mbeki, the president of South Africa, I have to hand it to him. He didn't go along.
Isn't that interesting?
He didn't go along with that.
I recall his stand. He came under a lot of criticism.
Yes, he sure did. Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So I respect.
Well, I wondered what the background of that was, and when I read your book, I'll learn a lot more about it.
Yeah, you will. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. Very good. Well, here's another point made in your book, that toxic chemicals can be good for you.
Yes, in small doses. And you know, do you take a multivitamin pill?
A great many.
Well, take a look, read the list of ingredients. They've got all kinds of things in those multivitamins that are highly toxic.
But they are good for me.
But you take them in small doses.
Yes.
And the theory here, you see, is, and it's been demonstrated with every substance that they've really tested it for. Things that are toxic or poisonous at high doses, it's assumed, well, they're a little bit poisonous at low doses. This is the whole EPA idea, that if you have a tiny trace of something, the companies involved have got to spend billions of dollars.
And, of course, we appreciate when we're vaccinated against disease that sometimes it helps you to have the hair of the dog that bit you.
Well, it's something like that theory. Yeah. Anyway, it really appears to be true. Another example is alcohol. You know, they say one drink a day or something is good for you, but if you drink too much of it, it'll kill you.
And you subscribe to that?
Yes, I do, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And radiation. Low levels of radiation are also beneficial.
Why?
Because it just seems to, it's like it tones up the system. You know, you know, in the Rocky Mountain area where you have, it's more elevated, there's lots of uranium, you have higher background radiation, you have more cosmic rays, they have lower cancer rates, distinctly lower than they do, say, in the Mississippi Valley.
I hope you're listening closely out there in television land, because this may change your diet and your ingestion procedures. That's very interesting.
Yeah, you should not worry about the scare. A lot of these scares. There's just all of this scaring.
What about coffee? Is that good for us?
I think so, probably a little bit. Not again. Don't drink too much of it. But I wouldn't believe anybody who says it's going to give you cancer.
I have a friend who's a doctor, Dr. William Campbell Douglas, who says tobacco is good for you. True. He's got a book. He says that for a man to have maximum good health, he should smoke 3 cigars a day because it relieves stress, it gets your systems going. He said, don't inhale, don't have too much, but he said 3 good cigars a day will extend your life. And this is a fellow who is 79 years old. He looks no older than 50, and he's married to a 32-year-old woman.
Is that right?
He attributes it to his cigars.
He's even going a bit further than I am in this book. I don't get. Someone suggested I get into the second-hand smoke business, but I didn't even touch that.
Well, this is very interesting. There's
well,
so much.
What about intelligent design?
We haven't even gotten into that. We have about a minute left.
All right.
Tell us about intelligent design.
The main lesson to learn on this is that the evidence for evolution is much weaker than everybody seems to imagine that it is. The organisms, the cells, the parts of the organism that it is intended to explain are fantastically much more complicated than people had imagined that they were. The idea was that the cell was a simple little lump of bituminous carbon or some ridiculous, that it was a simple homogeneous thing. It turns out that it's as complicated as a high-tech factory. And the fossil record has not got very much in it at all in terms of what,
you know the complete title of Darwin's book, Origin of Species?
By means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races.
It was a racist book.
Well, and the preservation of favored races, which ones are favored, the ones that are preserved? It's all a tautology. The survival of the fittest, which ones are the fittest, the ones that survive. It's an empty tautology.
Very interesting. Well, you know your subject very well. Did you have to do a great deal of research?
I did quite a bit of research, yeah, right. And but I enjoy it. It's a subject I very much enjoy.
It's fascinating. And there have been, it's amazing how the world has turned on this issue just in the last few years.
On evolution.
On evolution.
Yes, absolutely.
Darwin has become the subject of much criticism.
If you write an article about this, you get huge mail, you get huge response on both sides. It really gets people excited.
Yeah. Well, it's important.
It is important.
Whence cameth we?
Exactly.
And who brought us here?
Looked like there had to have been a designer.
I think there is. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We have to take a break, but following this break, we're going to have some final words from Tom Bethell, and you're going to be able to learn more about the books he's written, the articles he's written, and how you can get more information, especially about this book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Science. I haven't read it, but I've learned a lot about it talking with Tom, and I am motivated to read it. Stay with us.
Face the Truth is a production of the Conservative Caucus and is seen twice monthly on the station you are watching. We will be interviewing the movers and shakers of the pro-life movement. We hope to educate and even inspire you about what is being done in our country to protect and promote the sanctity of life. Thank you.
Don't miss Face the Truth with Stephen Peruka and Conservative Roundtable with Howard Phillips right here on this station every week.
Since the presidency of George H.W. Bush, the father of the incumbent, we've heard a great deal of talk about something called the New World Order. This is something of which every American should be wary, because what it means is the transfer of control over our tax dollars and the setting of policies which affect us from an electorally accountable Congress to international bureaucracies over which we have no real control. work with the Conservative Caucus in defeating the goals of the New World Order and restoring accountable, limited constitutional government in America.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on this program, I hope you'll check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. Also, I have a blog, howardphillips.com, and you'll find insights into many of these issues on that blog, which appears several times each week. Or you can write to us, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, and just mark it to the attention of TCC or Howard Phillips. And we'll send you more information. I'll send you a sample copy of my newsletter, the Howard Phillips Issues and Strategy Bulletin. Our guest for this program has been our friend, Tom Bethell, senior editor of the American Spectator, who's written this wonderful book, which I hope you'll read. It's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Science. And you can reach Tom at the address on the screen and learn more about other of his articles and his books, which have been published widely in a number of publications. Tom, you came to the United States in 1962, and you taught at an American prep school. I think you came to the United States because of your interest in New Orleans jazz, among other things.
That's correct, yes.
In the 15 seconds that are left, what advice would you give to our audience?
Well, I would, what bothered me, and I was a bit like that when I first came, I would tend to be critical of America. I thought that because I was from Britain, because I'd gone to Oxford, I was somehow rather superior, and I learnt that that was all wrong. But I would just say that you have to defend America. We have to defend America. I am now an American, and realize that there is nowhere else like it in the world. And, you know, we can't just let it go down the tubes.
Tom, our time is up, but I'm very grateful to you for sharing your time with us. We'll see you on the next edition of Conservative Roundtable.